I did not cry when my daughter-in-law rose at the will reading, and with a surgeon's precision, excised my name from my husband's $52 million estate. Tears would have suggested surprise. I was past surprise. I sat there, hands folded, knees together, the way my mother taught me to sit in rooms that wanted you small, and watched Rebecca speak like a person who has spent years rehearsing for a moment only she knew would arrive. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at anyone, really. She looked at the paper. Paper doesn't flinch. When the attorney laughed, a small off-balance chuckle that sounded like a shoe slipping on a wet step, the air inside the room seemed to shift a degree. It was a sound too soft to be defiant and too human to be strictly professional. Chairs sighed. A pen clicked. A throat cleared. I kept very still and wondered, not for the first time in those months, what Patrick had tucked away before the end. That question wasn't a riddle. It was a knocking. And behind the door was the sense, impossible, impolite, that he was speaking to me from the other side, tapping the water pipe the way prisoners do to say, "I'm still here." After the funeral, I stood in the garden as the last cars slid away like coins pushed across a quiet table. The lilies were raw at their cut faces, the grass wet and bruised. People had left behind paper cups with thumb-shaped dents, chairs pressed into the soil, and the faint, exhausted scent of cologne. No one came back to ask whether I needed a ride. Not even Rebecca, who had conducted the day like a metronome, the andante of the slideshow, the largo of the eulogy's pauses, the presto of the catering clean-up. Everything exact to the heartbeat. Everything except the living. Patrick would have despised it. He believed funerals should leak. A mascara streak. A bad joke that lands with a thud and then blooms into laughter because the dead man would have laughed first. Umbrellas forgotten so rain can wash shoulders clean. This one was flawless in the way of museum glass, a mirror you can see your face in, and nothing behind it. Inside, she was already taking the house apart in neat stacks. Folders in slate-coloured binders. Paper like snow, but each flake numbered. I made the small sound you make when you want your presence to be a courtesy, not a demand. She didn't look up, only said, "We'll be moving ahead with legal processing next week." As if we were discussing the pruning of the hedges. As if my nights in the hospital chair were a scheduling note she didn't need to open. Then she handed me the box. Patrick's name on the top in the expensive pen I bought him 2 Christmases ago, when he was pretending to still love pens. Inside, a tie clip, plain silver, a knife of a thing, light enough to vanish in a pocket, heavy enough to ruin a washing machine. No note, no letter, not even a crease of paper where a note might once have been. Rebecca's face did that polite smile people are taught in corporate trainings, the one that apologises without admitting. I turned the tie clip in my hand. It showed me no reflection. That night I sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea that forgot to be hot. The house held Patrick's shape the way a glove remembers a hand. His aftershave in the hallway. The spine-curved dent in the leather of his reading chair. On the refrigerator, a magnet from a diner we had stopped at in Utah because the sky was too clean not to eat pie under. I told myself that the chill drafting through the rooms was grief, the way a house unlatches when a door is opened and forgets to shut. But it felt like something else had come in. Not a person, not a ghost. A revision. The email was the kind that arrives without punctuation. Estate administration meeting scheduled. From her assistant. Not from her. The subject line made no room for breath, for the human superstition of checking on someone's heart before asking for their presence. Wednesday, 9 a.m. downtown. The building that smells like eucalyptus and sophisticated toner. The elevator that is always too quiet, as if it has secrets too. I was 5 minutes late because I was practicing being someone who might not go. They had arranged themselves around the table, the way instruments arrange themselves around a conductor. Rebecca at the head, a narrow carafe of water a few inches to her right, the glass not quite centred on its coaster, as if she liked to see a precise mistake. No extra packet was waiting for me. I sat where the air felt thinnest. "As executor," she said, and the room moved a millimetre closer to the conference speaker. She walked us through the estate like a realtor walking strangers through your childhood home, the way light falls in this room, how the closet has more space than you think if you push your shoulder just so. In this case, the light was stocks, the closet a trust, 2 commercial properties in Salem, the winery, the one that stained his hands with harvest the autumn he forgot to call me from the road. Then, Patrick transferred primary control of the family trust to me 6 months prior. I felt the animal inside me, the old one with thin fur and sharper teeth than anyone suspects, turn its ears. 6 months prior, I had been memorizing the map of the hospital ceiling. I had been marking the rhythm of the beeps, the way people on ships learn to sleep with engines. I had been smoothing the wrinkles from his socks, quieting the shame on his face when the body betrays you in little ways. 6 months prior, Patrick was letting someone else hold the pen I once held with him. "Mrs. Sloane's share?" an associate asked in a voice that had learned not to surprise anyone. "There are no remaining distributions assigned to her under the current filing," Rebecca said. And if there was a tremor in the room, I was the only tuning fork. After everyone had scraped back their chairs, after the deliberate zip of portfolios, I waited until the door machine sighed us alone. She closed her briefcase like a piano lid, slow to catch the fall of sound. I tied my scarf and left. Outside, the air was very clean and unafraid. At home, I did not turn on the lights. The house is a bell, and sometimes you need to hear it ring. Patrick's cane leaned against the back door the way a person leans when the body says, "One moment, please." I opened the drawer in his study, the one that sings for oil, and let it sing. Receipts to the left. A pencil that had never been allowed to be dull. Envelopes with old addresses that time had forwarded often enough to forget the origin. Under a ledger bound in the cloth of patient bookkeeping, a manila folder with no label. Secrecy is often a matter of not naming things. 3 pages. His hand on the first. That confident slope, only recently made a little timid by the way flesh resists when you ask it to remember. "Rebecca wants me to update the will," he wrote. "Says it needs to reflect current holdings. I asked why now. She says clarity. She's begun drafting on my behalf. I haven't signed. I haven't told Marietta. She would ask what I'm afraid to know." I read it until the paper felt warm. The second page was a photocopy of a will I had not been shown, one with the nervous energy of a draft that wants to be final. Margins like a conversation with oneself, circles that weren't circles so much as tornadoes. In the body of the text, my name printed in the old certainty. In the event of my passing, I leave my personal assets, including home shares and designated accounts, to my wife, Marietta Sloane, then neatly strangled with a line. In the margin, discuss with Rebecca. The third page, appointments, names, law firm letterhead with the same confident kerning as a luxury hotel. 2 dates from the weeks he was drifting in and out of morphine afternoons. The only times he was alone were the hours Rebecca called coverage, the way people call weather inclement, as if the sky owes you manners. The folder had the weight of a winter coat on a child's shoulders. I leaned back in his chair and looked up at the ceiling fan we always said we'd fix, and never did, because its voice was the punctuation of home. In the stillness, my memory opened a door. A dinner 3 springs ago, salmon and 1 glass of wine each. "You don't have to worry about anything, Ma," he'd said. He squeezed my wrist the way he used to when he was little, and wanted to say, "I'm here." But the words were with his other toys. I watched the black of the window surrender to the pale grey of neighbourhoods waking up. By then I knew the shape of the thing. Not a clerical mistake, not a misunderstanding, not grief fogging the glass. A construction. Rebecca had been building a hallway between Patrick and the world, with doors only she had the keys to. He had felt it. He had not told me. Fatigue is a city with many cul-de-sacs. You can walk for hours and never arrive anywhere new. I hid the folder where ordinary things go to be believed, under a stack of old National Geographics in the hall closet, with the board games missing pegs, and the lamp no one loved enough to throw away. Then I called Daniel Cow. Daniel met me at a cafe that still remembers that cigarettes used to be part of the furniture of conversation. The booths were honest. The mugs chipped the way marriages chip if you use them. He slid into the seat, rain blessing the shoulders of his coat. He read the pages with the kind of quiet that feels like a blanket being tucked and retucked across your knees until it is exactly right. At the note in Patrick's hand, his mouth made a small, tired line. "It's not sloppy," he said. "It's intentional." He listed dates like beads and circled the witnesses like a person circling tracks in the snow. Strangers. Patrick had always used neighbours, poker friends, people who knew his coffee order and the name of his first dog. Outsiders are clean. Clean is useful when you don't want memory to muddy the ink. We would verify what the county held, Daniel said. We would pull certified copies. We would walk the paper trail in daylight and see which footprints refused to be there. Back home, I moved the folder to the lockbox with passports and immunisation cards, and the photograph of Patrick at 27, holding a trout like a church offering. Then I opened his leather planner, which Rebecca's efficient hands had missed. Tuesday had a name written twice and circled, Hal Givens. I knew Hal from a non-profit project where Patrick had learned that tax law was a forest you could walk in forever if you had the right boots. Hal was not flashy. Hal asked good questions and then listened to the answer like it was paid work. He remembered Patrick looking thin, Daniel told me later. The pen in his hand a little heavier than usual. They discussed beneficiaries, guardrails for long lives that get lonely when the strong one goes first. "Rebecca will handle it," Patrick kept saying, as if saying a person's name is a plan. Hal offered an independent review. A week later, Rebecca cancelled the appointment. Hal kept notes because Hal is the kind of person who keeps notes. Intent is loud on days when the heart is steady. Doubt is louder when the heart stumbles. I turned the old album pages that night not to mourn, but to diagnose. In frame after frame, there she was, Rebecca in the background, helpful with a casserole, helpful with a tray of paperwork, helpful with a calendar. The positioning had been tender at first, old-fashioned helpfulness, but when you step back, symmetry can look like strategy, and strategy can look like waiting. 2 mornings later, Daniel called with a different weight in his voice. The county record showed a final will with a case number that did not belong to the draft. Patrick and I had reviewed last year in our kitchen with the smell of garlic and a list of jokes we promised to tell each, other in the nursing home. The original had been marked superseded, but the hand that pushed the stamp left no name. Daniel wanted another pair of eyes. Lydia Velasquez. Who has the kind of steadiness that makes people tell the truth just to be near it. Lydia listened. She did not nod to soothe me. She nodded when the facts stacked in ways buildings are supposed to. She asked questions that made my mouth dry and then less dry. When Daniel mentioned the unfamiliar witnesses, she said their names like she was reading an index where the worst things are filed. "They've surfaced before," she said. "People who notarize in absence. A service no one offers and some people purchase." She would file quietly, she said. "Paper leaves a sheen wherever it slides, even if you buff the table after." In the garage I found Patrick's file cabinet, still scented with tobacco from the decade when we believed habit was the same as personality. In last year's folder a document, Revocable Living Trust Addendum, unsigned, margins crowdsourced by time. A section called Survivor Protections. My name bold and unembarrassed, with his penciled additions, healthcare, housing, legal counsel, so I would not bow to a future out of fear. In the margin he had written, "We talked about this." Rebecca said she'd handle it. That night on the porch, the wind worked the trees the way memory works a story until the edges get honest. I slept 3 hours and woke as if waking were an action that could be perfected. Lydia filed for a freeze. The court gave us a temporary winter. Funds could not migrate. Titles could not molt. Then a cream envelope. No return address, like an invitation from a house that doesn't admit it is haunted. The country club, cocktails, a tribute. A charity auction with things called Patrick's Favourites, as if a man can be displayed in glass and owned by a bidder with a paddle. 4 days. No phone call, no text. But the paper thick enough to be confident of its welcome. I went. I wore the blouse from our 35th anniversary because Silk remembers the hand that bought it. At the entrance, a list of names typed in the font that tells donors they are both beloved and observed. Inside, the old social choreography, cheek kisses that are almost sincere, a laugh with too many teeth, hands arranged on the stem of a glass like a promise to be gentle. A photo at the bar, a gold frame around a version of Patrick I have always argued with silently. He looked tired in that photo. He was tired. But he was also the man who would have danced in a kitchen with one sock on, and they never pick that photo because kitchens don't print well on glossy programmes. Rebecca was a planet. People orbited. She moved with the control of a person who has practiced not knocking over centrepieces. When she saw me, her smile hiccuped. Then it was better than before. I stood before the auction table labelled Patrick's favourite things, and read the captions that forgot the word gift, and the word marriage, and the phrase, this was ours. I touched the corner of the first edition novel I had scoured 3 cities to find. My name had been lifted from the story the way a watermark can be stripped by someone. Who knows what they're doing? A man asked me about fundy, allocations like I still sat at the desk, where cheques become scholarships. When I told him I had been removed, his face passed through 3 expressions, none of which wanted to live on it. That was when I learned the first rule of elegant theft. You steal in one direction and keep telling the other direction you are doing them a favour. From that night I carried phrases like pebbles in a pocket. Managing partner responsibilities. Expedite. Discretionary clauses. The words had clean edges. The kind that cut you and then disappear into the carpet. We filed. The court gave us a date. 2 weeks. It felt like the chime a house makes when a door opens in a different room. Lydia's assistant laid out documents along a table until the table seemed shorter. Email printouts slept under pink tabs. Security logs waited under yellow ones. A timeline taped to the wall did the work of making chaos linear. Lydia came in holding a page the way you hold a snake by the right part of its neck. Confidential, the header said. 6 weeks before Patrick died. Revised structure, immediate actions. Remove co-beneficiary privileges per our discussion. The gentlest violence I've ever seen was done with a keyboard, subpoenas unfurled. We asked the office building to tell the truth about Sundays. It did. The Times did not care which version of the story sat at the head of the table. We engaged a handwriting expert who handled signatures like feathers, fallen from a bird that used to live inside your house. The strokes didn't match the way a marriage knows the difference between a real apology and a performance. The cemetery gave me a morning I could understand. Sky the colour of old paper. Grass honest about the last rain. His stone had the sentence we chose because we believed we had chosen enough sentences together to pick the last one. He lived with grace. He left with love. I didn't say anything out loud. I let the cold do the work of telling me I could still feel. Ava's deposition was the moment the room inhaled. She came in without armour, which is a kind of armour. She told the story of a Sunday night with a jacket left on a chair and a conference room bright as noon. Unsigned forms creating the silhouette of a man not present. Just witness it, Rebecca had said. He stepped out. Ava had written it down not because she knew the future needed it, but because the present had felt wrong. Liquidate silently. No delays. She heard it and kept it, the way some people press clover between pages. She had a child, a mortgage, a job that fed both. She had a conscience that fed her. She signed and dated the page that bent the narrative back toward where it began. The lawyer letter that arrived 2 days later accused me of interfering with a lawful transition the way a person accuses a storm of getting a coat wet. It threw words like grief, misunderstanding, and bitter at my door and expected me to invite them in. I put the letter beside my coffee and called Daniel. "I've been fine for years," I told him. "Just quiet." He laughed the way relief laughs when it realizes it has been scheduled this whole time. Our rebuttal walked in wearing a suit that fit. Ava's notes. Metadata that refuse to pretend Sundays are Mondays. Drafts with margin ghosts. Security logs that do not lie because electricity has nothing to gain from untruth. We were not loud. We were accurate. An invitation from the Foundation came next, stamped with the confidence of letterhead that has paid its dues. Finalize the transfer of executive authority. No mention of the lawsuit, because paper believes it can choose its blind spots. Thursday, 2 o'clock. I arrived 5 minutes early because Grace needs witnesses. The glass building did its usual shimmer. People who had applauded my chicken a decade ago nodded the way you nod at a bench you once sat on during a summer concert. Rebecca was the colour of expensive water. When she said, "With your grace I carry it forward," I understood the kind of sentence that eats the thing it thanks. I slid the envelope to Patrick's oldest friend on the board. The documents passed from hand to hand like an unwelcome hymn. Faces did math. Rebecca's smile became a painting. I thanked the room for the invitation and left as if leaving were a job I had trained for. By evening, the board wanted an internal review. A neutral third party. A postponement shaped like a full stop. It was not vengeance. It was gravity. Things falling back into the wells they had been pulled from. I took Patrick's first charter and his notes on mentorship and the draft of the grant proposal that first made him believe charity is not a posture but a verb. And I asked Daniel to archive them where climate control preserves what human control endangers. At the lake, the air put edges back on me. Silence came. The kind Lydia warns you about. The strategic kind. And then the email. No further challenge. Rebecca stepping aside because reputations are living things that require oxygen. No admission. Those are for churches and kitchens, not law offices. The Foundation's statement named a committee of older hands. Daniel forwarded a note from one of them. You were right to protect what mattered. It was a sentence that did not want applause. Lydia offered paths, damages, restitution, the long corridors where justice and fatigue learn to recognize each other's shoes. I told her no. I had already won the part that doesn't fit on a ledger. I had found my name in the place someone erased it and written it back in a pen that won't bleed when the weather changes. In a drawer I hadn't opened in years, I found a sealed envelope. Inside, an earlier will, Patrick's voice in the margins mentioning our trips, our talk of legacy as the opposite of possession. My role as lifelong co-trustee, written as if the word lifelong still meant time will keep its promises. He signed it, not witnessed, only intent, the oldest witness. Weeks later, the Foundation felt less staged, more human. The interim committee asked my counsel on a scholarship. I said yes the way you say yes to a neighbour who asks if the lilacs are blooming on your side yet. I didn't want an office or a plate with my name on it. I wanted the work to keep being the work. At the community garden, the groundskeeper had put bulbs to bed under the frost. Daffodils are brave in a way no one writes about. They are small and they volunteer. The plaque we placed years ago had weathered into its own truth. For those who plant for a future they may never see. I thought, for once, about seeing enough. A letter came from a former scholar, now a mentor herself, what Patrick called the second harvest. She didn't know the story and didn't need to. The work had crossed the river and found new banks. In my kitchen, the same room where silence had once tried to tell me I was a guest in my own story, I made tea and opened the back door. The night was cool and obedient. The sky belonged to anyone willing to look up. I was not erased. I was not a placeholder in a family genealogy written in permanent marker. I was a woman who stood still long enough for the paper to confess, and then kept walking. If this story presses against any place in you that remembers how to reclaim a name, know this. Quiet victories are not small. They are simply private, and privacy is a cathedral without microphones. By the time Monday arrived with its square shoulders and tight jaw, a thin film of calm had settled over the week. Not peace. Peace is a field. This was the hush of a theatre before the curtain moves. The interim committee had begun their internal review. Daniel's emails came clipped and factual. Lydia's calendar bristled with coloured flags. I watered the fern. Patrick always pretended not to care about and told it, out loud, that we were doing as well as could be expected, for a plant and a person learning to live without a witness. Placed the tie clip on the kitchen counter the way, you might put a shard of glass somewhere you won't step on it. For days it had sat in its box like a new moon, present, silent, pretending not to govern the tide. I kept catching it in the corner of my eye while making tea, while rinsing spoons, while opening the drawer for a pen. The metal held a quality I could not explain. Expensive, yes. Impersonal, certainly. But there was something else, a slight asymmetry, a hesitation in its polish. It had not belonged on a silk tie. It belonged somewhere else. A hinge on nothing. I took it to the jeweller 2 blocks from the old post office, the one where the owner wears a magnifying loupe even when he is saying hello. He greeted me with the kind of courtesy that comes from fixing things people love. When I set the clip on the velvet square, he leaned in as if the object had whispered a secret meant only for him. "You see this edge?" he said, turning it under the lamplight with tweezers. "It's not factory, hand-filed." He pressed where the silver thinned along the inner seam, then paused. "May I?" I nodded. He lifted a slender bone tool from his tray and pressed, softly at first, then with the patience of someone trying to find a door in a wall they know is there. The clip gave the smallest sigh. A sliver along the spine detached like a breath you've been holding. Inside, a compartment no thicker than a fingernail. He set what he found on the velvet with the gentleness you reserve for eggs and last words. It was a micro SD card, black, matte, anonymous. My mouth made a shape I didn't recognize. "These aren't common in tie clips," he said, half amused, half professional. Whoever made this wanted it invisible to anyone who didn't already know. I walked home the long way, past the bookstore with the window that catches the morning, past the diner with the pie, that honestly never needed to be as good as it was to keep us faithful. At home I sat at Patrick's desk and stared at the small square of secrets. I did not have the adapter to read it. I called Daniel. "Don't plug it into anything yet," he said, voice steady, already moving 6 steps ahead. "Bring it in. We'll image it first, copy the contents without altering metadata, and let a forensic specialist open the copy. If there's anything on it, we'll want provenance." The word provenance used to belong to paintings and wine. Now it belonged to our lives. At Daniel's office, Lydia met us with a small, contained smile that meant good work, but now be quieter. The lab down the hall smelled like the shy cousin of hospitals, clean, humming, wires at attention. A technician with careful hair and a coffee mug that said "do no harm" to evidence took the card like it was lighter than it looked. He explained the steps. Right blocker, bit-by-bit image. Hash values to prove nothing changed. It felt absurd and holy, the way ceremony sometimes does when you're too close to it to pretend it's ordinary. We watched through glass as he moved through the sequence. Then a nod. A copy opened on his screen. Folders, dates, names that sat like stones in the riverbed. Inside was a small archive. PDFs, audio files, 2 images, a text document called "If Found." No passwords prompted him. The technician glanced at Lydia. She nodded. He opened the text first. "If found, read this first. Marietta, if this reaches you, it means I did not find the right hour to put the right sentence in front of the right person. I didn't put this in a wall because houses get sold. I put it in a tie clip, because that's what people don't throw away when they're pretending to be respectful. If you are reading, you already know more than I said out loud. I'm sorry. I was tired at the end and made the mistake of believing silence is a form of care. I was wrong. This is me correcting. I did not realize I had reached for Daniel's hand until I felt the warmth of it. He didn't pull away. He would never tell anyone. Let's continue, Lydia said, soft. We did. The PDFs were scans, drafts with embedded comments that did not appear on the versions Rebecca had filed, correspondence with a boutique estate consultant out of state that I had never heard of, someone named Kaminsky, whose emails were short and clinical, pricing out possibilities the way people price out kitchen remodels. Only the cabinets were clauses that removed me as co-trustee for expedience. There were screenshots from Patrick's phone of messages he had never sent. In one, he had typed and then deleted 4 times the sentence, "I need to slow this down." In another, a message to Daniel he never sent because he didn't want to bother him with what might be nothing. The unsent sentences were the saddest things I have ever read. The audio files were the shape of a man trying to get brave. He had recorded them while sitting in the car outside doctors' offices, by the sound of them, the whir of HVAC, the seatbelt chime he never learned to shut up quietly. The first file was 3 minutes of listing what he knew, what he didn't, and what he feared. He spoke Rebecca's name like a person trying to explain weather that is unusually violent but technically seasonal. He used words he never used at home: leverage, optics, exposure. In the second file, his voice shook once and then steadied. He said my name 4 times. Marietta, Ma, if you ever hear this, I need you to know I tried to make it simple and that was the wrong instinct. It isn't simple. The truth almost never is. I thought I could fix it before it touched you. I'm out of time. I'm sorry. Don't let them make you small. I am not a person who puts her face in her hands. I did then. Lydia gave me the good grace of looking away. There was also a scan of a bank form, Harbour and First, downtown, confirming a safety deposit box rental 2 months before he died. The key number was blacked out in the scan. Below it, in his hand, a note. The card has the rest. The rest was in the images folder, photographs of the key, front and back, with the number legible, and a shot of the signature card with his name, and a second space blank. Second signature if needed, the typed line read. He had left it empty. He had always left a place for me. Lydia printed the essentials, sealed the rest. We went to the bank together because there are doors you don't walk through alone. In the vault, the metal drawers stood in patient rows like a choir. The clerk handled the box with the solemnity of ritual. When the drawer slid open, it revealed a single manila envelope folded once to encourage humility. My name in his hand. Inside, a letter and a smaller envelope marked for the board, if it comes to that. His letter carried the voice he used when we sat with coffee and a newspaper on Sundays. The voice that left space for the chorus of the world and the clink of china. Ma, I don't know which day you open this. I hope it's a day that has you in it more than me. I made mistakes. The first was thinking I could borrow your patience without telling you what it was for. The second was believing Rebecca's speed was a kindness. Speed makes some things merciful. Bandages, phone calls with bad news, but not documents that decide who is a witness and who is an anecdote. If you are holding this, I need you to do 3 things. Give Lydia the board packet enclosed. If the board is what we built, they will listen. If it isn't, we will have learned in time to protect the work. Archive the earlier will, the one with our notes. Not for court, for history. I don't want our story outsourced to a filing cabinet's appetite. Keep the house noisy for a while. Cry loud, laugh at the wrong moment. Invite people who forget umbrellas. I want our life to resist rehearsal. I love you. If there's a margin to write in from wherever I am, I will fill it. The smaller envelope contained copies of emails and a letter of instruction he had drafted to the board, naming principles and procedures, and requesting, if irregularities arose, that an independent ethics council be brought in. It referenced the very committee now in place and requested that any proposed transition be paused upon evidence of undue influence, unexplained signature anomalies, or internal pressure exerted under the cover of illness. He wrote those phrases during a week he did not tell me he was afraid. Lydia's eyes brightened the way steel brightens in a forge. "This closes 3 doors they kept propped open," she said. "We file it with the court under seal and present the board copy directly. The provenance is clean. The chain of custody is unbroken. And Patrick's intention is explicit in ink you can't argue with." We left the bank into a day that had decided to be beautiful at an hour when beauty feels a little showy. I wanted to be angry at the weather for not dimming itself to match us. Then I remembered his third instruction, keep it messy. I took a breath that didn't apologize. The preliminary hearing felt small compared to what it shifted. 10 minutes, perhaps 12. Lydia spoke with the precision of someone who knows where the rope is frayed and what happens if you tug there. The judge was a woman whose hair announced she had no time for courtroom theatre. Our motion to extend the freeze was granted pending full discovery. The room didn't change colour, but the corridor outside it did. You could see people remembering how to make eye contact or deciding not to. That afternoon, Daniel delivered the board packet to a member whose integrity had its own rumour. We did not attend their meeting. That is not how quiet wins are won. Later that evening, he called from a car parked somewhere with a view of headlights and rain. "They read it," he said, voice tight with the effort of not being relieved too soon. There were questions, real ones. "They've called for an ethics council." Rebecca's counsel requested a recess. No vote today. No vote this week. I slept for 4 hours and woke as if I'd been pulled up from a familiar lake by a hand that knew exactly where my shoulder was. In the morning, I made pancakes badly on purpose and burned one because the house needed a smell to argue with. I opened windows. The air shrugged in. Days found a rhythm that did not presume to be permanent. Subpoena returns arrived like postcards from a country we had once visited and pretended not to understand. Digital forensics confirmed what Ava had given legs to. Sunday timestamps for documents allegedly executed in office. IP addresses that belonged to machines not located where signatures claimed to be. Document properties showing last edits by a username that, when cross-referenced with HR rosters, belonged to a temp who had never met Patrick. When confronted in deposition, the temp said, "I was told it was a formatting job," and then cried until someone remembered to bring water. Rebecca's lawyer shifted his angle from thunder to drizzle. He sent a letter that used the word misapprehension, as if it were a towel thrown across a spill. Lydia wrote back in fewer words than he had used, and with more gravity. The interim committee, for their part, issued a gentle statement that felt like the first page of a new manual. "We will be reviewing procedures. We are grateful for patience. This work belongs to many. We are committed to honouring original mission and intent." I did as Patrick asked. I archived the earlier will, not as evidence but as artefact, with Daniel's firm, which had begun to feel like a monastery for paper. I made the house noisy with small, deliberate chaos. People came and forgot umbrellas. I lent them ours and let them go home damp and laughing. We told stories that did not flatter us. We ate pasta out of bowls that were too big for pasta, because sometimes hunger lives in places that food can't reach. When the board met again under the eye of Ethics Council, I went for a walk along the lake and counted dogs. 9 hushed the path with their seriousness. One carried a stick so large it should have been taxed. I didn't check my phone until I reached the bench with the brass plaque for a man who loved Thursdays. Daniel's text was unadorned. Vote postponed. Independent audit approved. Rebecca on administrative leave pending findings. Ethics Council to recommend governance reforms. You okay? I stared at you okay, and thought about the difference between being okay and being done. Then I typed, now I am. The audit was not dramatic. Audits rarely are. They are thorough, which is a different kind of mercy. It found what we already knew and what we hadn't yet guessed. It found that pressure had been exerted in emails, whose punctation attempted warmth but could not hide urgency. It found clauses inserted for clarity that functioned only to concentrate decision-making in one pair of hands. It found the erosion of customary checks, 2 signatures where there had been 3, a witness replaced by a name that belonged to a person who had been on vacation in a different time zone. It recommended reversals, restorations and trainings that would be both tedious and life-saving. Rebecca resigned in a letter that did not ask forgiveness and did not offer it. She would devote time to personal matters and to quiet, reflection on how best to serve in ways that do not distract from the mission. I read it at the kitchen table and felt nothing of the triumph I might have imagined months ago. Victory is a word for games. What we had was something closer to alignment. We did not pursue damages. Lydia made the spreadsheet that showed we could. Daniel made the face that asked if I wanted to. I said no twice, once for them and once for me. The court issued an order that acknowledged my role in the trust as originally constructed. The foundation created a council of elders, which is a ridiculous name until you are grateful for it, and asked me to serve in a non-voting capacity for a year to advise on memory. I said yes, with the right portion of my heart. The tie clip sat on my desk in its open state for a week like a small animal released from an unkind trap. I closed it one morning and placed it in the shallow dish where Patrick kept his watch at night. Sometimes an object ceases to be dangerous without ceasing to be itself. Spring suggested itself cautiously. The community garden lifted green braille through the soil. I stood at the plaque we had placed years ago and traced the sentence with my thumb, "For those who plant for a future they may never see." Patrick saw enough. He saw the line and the next one. I could carry from there. I visited Ava at her new job. She had left the firm the week she testified, and now worked in an office with windows that forgave people for not knowing the right words yet. We had tea in paper cups because real cups are a luxury at new jobs. She told me her son had finally learned to tie his shoes without turning anger into knots. I told her the secret about pancakes and noise. We laughed like 2 people who had once held a live wire together and decided to keep both hands. Lydia came for dinner on a Wednesday with a loaf of bread that made the entire house reconsider its opinions. We ate with our fingers in places the etiquette books would have frowned at and talked about cases that were not this one. She told me that sometimes the law is a ladder thrown down a well and sometimes it is only a flashlight. "This time," she said, tearing another piece of the bread, "we got both." I went to the foundation on a day the tulips were still deciding how much of themselves to show. The lobby no longer felt like an airport for people with inherited last names. It felt smaller, human. Lee, the young board member who had spoken my name at the luncheon, like it belonged in the room, walked me through a draft of reforms with the mixture of humility and certainty that makes good work survive more than one administration. We spoke about mentorship like it was gardening, and about checks and balances, like it was good fencing, not to keep humans out, but to keep them from wandering off the edge on foggy mornings. In Patrick's study, which had resumed being a room for reading, and not a chapel for grief, I sorted the last of the papers into 3 neat piles. Keep, give, burn. The burn pile was small and holy. Love does not demand that everything be remembered. It asks for what is true to be treated with the honour of accuracy, and for the rest to be released without petulance. I lit the fireplace and fed it sentences that could not help anyone by surviving. The room warmed in the way rooms do when they agree with your choices. The night I finished, I placed his letter back in its envelope and set it in the drawer with the smooth glide we'd always meant to sand. I touched the tie clip once, like a person touching the shoulder of a friend they are about to leave in a room they trust to behave. On our first real spring Saturday, the house filled with the noise I had promised him, shoes in the entryway that did not belong to me, laughter that didn't ask permission, a joke told badly and then redeemed by the fact of telling. Someone spilled wine on the table Patrick had sanded by hand, and I did not flinch. I took a cloth and pressed, and the wood swallowed the stain like a memory you decide to keep but stop feeding. Near the end of the evening, when the air had gone soft and the windows wore the light like jewellery, I stepped into the garden. The wind moved the new leaves with the gentle choreography of a rehearsal that finally understands it's ready for an audience. I listened for him the way I always will, in the distance between my heart and the next sound. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The house was messy. People had cried. 2 umbrellas sat lonely by the door, because their owners had left in weather they believed would be kind. It was exactly as he had asked. Later, at the sink with sleeves rolled and the gold ring of a wineglass catching the last of the day, I thought of the sentence he wrote. Don't let them make you small. The trick, I decided, is not to become large in response. It is to remain exact in your true size, to refuse the shrinking without inflating, to take the room you have earned and fill it with unremarkable, uncompromised presence. I wiped the counter where the tie clip had once sat like a question and turned out the light. Upstairs, the bedroom was its familiar argument of pillows. I lay down in the place where his shoulder once made a dip and closed my eyes. Somewhere in the house, a floorboard spoke the old language of wood. I understood every word,